Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OTT Executive Podcast. I'm Brian Mahoney, your host, the CEO of Trend Research, and the president of the OTT Executive Community. In this podcast, we interview leaders in the industry and get to know them and get to know a little bit from them, too. So today I'm joined by Natasha Hritzuk. Natasha, welcome.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, Natasha, you're the head of research, right, for Warner Brothers Discovery?
Yes, so not the head of research all up, but corporate research, which is effectively a function that sits over all of the different business units at Warner Brothers Discovery.
Okay, great. And we'll get into that in a minute. But one of the things we like to do in this podcast is sort of personalize some of the luminaries in the industry, get to know a little bit about you, your career background. How did you get to your current role? Tell us about your career.
I feel like I've got probably one of the more kind of twistier, turnier paths, but I started off actually in academia and realized very, very rapidly that it was not for me. And my background was in political psychology and political behavior. So, looking at how people behaved within the political ecosystem.
Okay.
And I started to realize that I wanted to do something that had more of a commercial element, where I could see the research lead to an outcome that was tangible. And so started kind of leapt out of academia and started working for a research agency, which is such a great way as a researcher to start your career. I think one of the great things about beginning the trajectory at a research firm is you learn about every vertical because you're working with pharmaceutical companies, you're
Hmm.
working with beverage companies, you're working for insurance companies, quick serve. Like you get a real sampling of how research is applied across different businesses, but you're also working across different methodologies. You do branding research, innovation
Hmm.
research, advertising, so it gives you a really interesting purview around common themes, common challenges that researchers face across all of the different businesses that have research teams, which is pretty much every business. But
Hmm.
you also start to fortify and build up a research toolkit. Um, what didn't work for me as well on the agency side was you never actually got to see things through to fruition. You're sort of like, doing the work and then you hand it off to your client and your client implements it or cascades it through their org. So then I realized, well, if they're the ones that are taking the research and cascading it, I want to do that.
Hmm.
So I moved from the agency side to a job that I loved, General Mills, food.
Okay.
Betty
Like
Crocker.
cereal and stuff like that?
I didn't work on the cereal business. They
Okay.
were based, I was in the UK at the time, and they were based in Switzerland, but the UK business was, these will be familiar brands, Nature Valley,
Yeah.
Haagen-Dazs, Old El Paso,
Oh, I
Betty
love
Crocker.
Haagen-Dazs. I would
I
have loved
mean,
that job. Did you get free samples?
we did have a little freezer with ice
You,
cream.
you got to do research, right?
Yeah, yeah. The Haagen-Dazs research and actually the Betty Crocker research was also really fun. You were like baking chocolate cakes and blueberry muffins with women in Manchester, and it was so much fun. Love
That
that
is
job.
fun. Wow.
And I think that, again, from a researcher perspective, CPG is like ground zero for research
Mm.
because every single element of the business depends on research to
Hmm.
inform decision making, from generating a new product idea. Are there unmet needs in the marketplace to building out what the product looks like? How much salt? How much sugar? What should it look like? Should it be crispy and brown on top? Through to the packaging, the
Hmm.
marketing, the merchandising, the pricing. You do the volumetrics research. How big is this going to be? Is this going to be scalable globally? Every there's not one element of the product that isn't touched by research. So again, kind of like when you're on the agency side,
Hmm.
you really learn how to do every type of research possible around a product that is either in the market or one that's about to be launched. So it's kind of ground zero. Like you just learn how to do every methodology
Hmm.
is utilized, or most methodologies are utilized. You also have to have you learn a lot of commercial acumen because you can't just drop decks on the head of sales's desk or the CMO's desk, they depend on you to interpret and help them
Hmm.
implement the research around whatever the kind of key business question is they're trying to answer.
Hmm.
Um, Loved that job. I was there for 5 years, and then I
And
went.
it's funny that you say like, it's a great foundational
Yeah.
career job, right? Because, so I'm a research guy, right? And when you're in that sort of that sort of intersection between human behavior and psychology and data,
Hmm.
and like looking at
Hmm.
the research from an analytical and data perspective. So you're informing that, but there's always a bit of art and science, right? There's always that kind of balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And because you're researching pretty much everything, um, you've got to get, I think in some instances, the research is really like tried and true. It's really clear cut. It's very, apparent what you need to do on the back of it. But there are other instances where maybe the outcome isn't what anybody anticipated. It leads to a course correction or a shift
Hmm.
in strategy. And that's really, there's an element of art, but it's understanding the commercial side, understanding the stakeholder needs, all of those different elements get kind of woven together in the sort of craft of doing research. So it's not just the execution, but it's also the landing and making sure the output is moving the
Hmm.
dial for the business.
Isn't
Uh,
it fun when you get those like eureka, those aha moments that you didn't anticipate? You're like, oh
yeah.
my goodness, this could have a major impact on the business.
Yeah, sometimes a good one and sometimes not a good one. And both,
Mhm.
I would say probably the latter one is always a little tricky to navigate, especially when, the
Mm.
business expects that there's going to be a certain outcome and resources are being marshaled in that direction. And then you
Mm.
come back and you're like, oh, I'm not sure this
You're
is,
you're doing it wrong.
yeah,
Sorry.
this isn't going to work. Nobody wants this product. So
So where'd you go from General Mills after that?
then I moved to another vertical, and this was never by design. We were moving back to New York, and I ended up at Microsoft. So I ran a research team at Microsoft. It was a global team. So I went from UK centric to a team that was scattered in most major markets, and we were supporting the advertising and consumer monetization group.
Mhm.
So the focus there was on taking all of Microsoft's core assets and identifying other opportunities to monetize them. Whether it was through, advertising or whether it was through creating, connect-based applications for department stores where you could, try on clothes and have a Connect camera embedded in the mirror so you could take pictures of all the clothes that you had on and then swipe through and make a decision about what you wanted to purchase. So that was interesting because, a food company, this is elemental stuff. Like this is what people are, it's kind of like baseline, it's human sustenance. And
Yep.
then when you move to technology, it's more about potential and it's about the future and how can
Mm.
you take something that's been built and extend it in all of these directions that don't currently exist. So that kind of got the brain going in a slightly different direction, which was, you had to kind of be there was an element of flexibility
Mhm.
and working with engineers was different than working with CMOs, much more concrete,
Very different. Yeah, good
very
point.
different.
Yeah.
So that was loads of fun as well and developed some different muscles and learned um about a new vertical which was it was really fascinating and it
Okay,
was a
so
great
from
time to be
food
there.
to tech, then where'd you go?
So then I went to entertainment.
There we
Um
go, the leap. All right,
yep,
welcome to the industry.
yep. So and it's funny, in every instance, it just happened to be an opportunity that presented itself. And in
Hmm.
every instance, I walked in without a clue about what the job actually was. Like just, I think the common thread with all of them was at Microsoft, they wanted somebody that had a consumer, like a CPG, true consumer insights background. And when I initially came to what was Turner, which then became Warner Media, which then became Warner Brothers Discovery, which is about to become something else.
Hmm.
But when I joined this company, it wasn't really a D2C business. You
Hmm.
were basically selling advertising and you were selling, it was about distribution. So you were selling, the different channels to distributors.
Yep.
So it was B2B and they hadn't really thought about I mean, you were still testing stuff with consumers, but you weren't selling directly to consumers in any instance. And so the guy that hired me, Howard Schimmel, I think he'd kind of had a sense that there were these fluctuations in the ecosystem. Cable was starting to constrict. Netflix had moved away from DVDs to creating, this digital streaming
Yeah,
service. And so he brought me on board because he wanted somebody with a pure consumer insights background versus more of a media and entertainment background. So that was kind of my launch
fresh
pad into
ideas.
this
Yeah.
world.
Hmm. It's funny that you say that too, Natasha, because I've done a lot of these interviews, and what I found is some of the most successful people, there's a certain humility about them where they see an opportunity, they go for it. They like, yeah, it's maybe a new sphere. You're not the expert, but you're really good at being able to kind of like put all those pieces together, use some of your background to, kind of add value into a new space. So I really do appreciate that.
Well, that's super interesting to hear. And I mean, I think some of it is just the way life works out.
Mhm.
The job comes up, it's interesting, you take it or you don't take it, whatever the case might be. But I also think being uncomfortable is not always a bad thing. So when you're moving into a new vertical and the business issues are different, the the kind of stakeholders have different needs, again, like food to engineering to a business where it's kind of ad sales distribution and then creators. Very, very different, a very different lens in each instance. And there's always a scary moment where you realize, I don't understand what these guys are talking about. The language is different, the
We've
way
all
they
been
use
there.
research is different. But what you realize is, first of all, I can adapt. It's
Mhm.
going to take me a little bit of time, but I can adapt. And that's kind of comforting because when you're going through times of change, knowing that you have the capacity to adapt gives you a little bit of a sense of security and stability. But the
Mhm.
other thing is, you realize at the end of the day, you're still calibrating to the consumer. And it's not necessarily a different consumer. People eat cakes, they watch TV, they do things on their computer. Like it's not like you're looking at different species. You're still
Right.
looking at humans, but the
You're not
verticals,
analyzing Martians somewhere else. Like you're
yeah,
you're a human too, right? Like you could relate to what you're researching.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so all you're doing is you're looking at different lenses of human life, whether it's humans who are investing money or buying insurance, humans that are eating at quick serve restaurants or picking out a new car. These are all things that are inherently relatable because
Hmm.
they're all part of how humans engage with products and services. So there's that kind of interesting point of commonality.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think you almost have to have a sense of wonder like a child, right? Like you're
Mhm.
going through this process. It's familiar to you, but at the same time, there's new insights, and it's kind of that mashup of ideas and research and science and looking at consumer behavior where the real kind of aha moments come from. So we've taken it through the current day and your role right now. Maybe you describe like what your purview is, what your team looks like, what your mandate is in your current role.
Um, so this has been, I guess, coming up to 3 years in this role, but it's funny when I kind of reflect on my trajectory at this company, I've kind of always been doing this role. It's just been in different companies, in effect. I feel like there's these different chapters. There was the Turner chapter, the Warner Media chapter. I did was part of the launch team for HBO Max. So I was
Nice.
doing consumer insights within the context of HBO Max. Um, and then this interesting opportunity came up to build a corporate research team. There'd been a bigger one, and then did they really want centralized research? No, but we could still use a corporate research team. So what was that going to be? And it kind of landed on my plate. And I feel like it was kind of the right job at the right time. Um, I'd had enough time at the company where I knew the players. The thing about corporate research is it's a diplomacy role. Your number one objective is to not do research that your partners across the business units are doing. You have to
Hmm.
be wholly incremental. And
So
you
you're
also
adding value to that. Maybe you can define what are the types of like where's their lane and where is your, I guess, highway?
yes, great question. So the business unit leads, so, at our company, it's the head of research for theatrical, the head of research for studios like Warner Brothers Television, content sales, responsible for doing the research that facilitates the sale of our library content. D2C, the research team that leads, HBO Max and the streaming business, etc. And what my colleagues who work across these businesses are responsible for is the day-to-day management of that business. So if you're working in theatrical, it's about testing all the marketing that's going to be part of the launch of a new title,
Hmm.
calibrating performance of that title, anything related to the success of that business, and where it will touch consumers is going to be the purview of that researcher.
Okay.
Um, on the D2C side, it's around, content mix, the product experience. Like, is the app, when as a consumer, when you land on HBO Max, is it an optimized? Can you find what you want to watch? Then all the marketing around the titles that are on that service. So it's really vital work, and it's all instrumental in making sure that the stakeholders across that business are getting the information they need to, deliver to consumers.
Hmm. So will
Um,
you see those individual like, research projects or studies or whatever and say, hey, here's a really interesting, let's go a layer up, across, let's say you're looking at community engagement, right? And each of those different lanes, let's say, or divisions are doing their thing. And you're like, hey, how do we optimize engagement for our viewers? Is that the type of project you might take on?
One altitude even above that.
Okay.
So, again, we need to do work that is relevant to all the business units, but isn't operationally going to impact, like, isn't about any single line of business and their day-to-day operations.
Hmm.
And what we realized is that the two areas that these researchers didn't have time to tackle were thinking about dynamics in the entertainment, technology, cultural ecosystem today. What are different things that are going on that have an impact on our business, that will have implications for our business, that we need to pay attention to? So an example of that, I can give a wide range of examples, but one was one big lane for us that we're still focused on. So we tend to have these lanes that we work on longitudinally. So it's not like a one and done study. They become kind of longer term. They become longer term
Almost like
initiatives.
benchmarking. You can see the trends over time type of deal, or
It's kind of more like what I would call unspooling a complex problem.
okay.
So, short form. Short form, we
Mm,
started to realize was something we could not afford to ignore as a studio.
yep.
Um, the first intersection we had with short form was through the generations research we do. So every year we do work on alpha through boomers, but we were initially focused more on Z and millennials because we started to, sense that their entertainment consumption habits were different than previous generations, and
Very
we needed to
different.
get a
Yeah.
handle on it.
Hmm.
That study flagged up that a lot of time was being spent on short form platforms like TikTok and YouTube. So then you're thinking, okay, if they're spending half their day on these platforms, is this a threat? Is this an opportunity for us? How do we leverage this? What does this mean for the business? So then immediately that becomes a lane for us to dig in. So how do we understand this in a way that's, how do we start to contextualize the issue or opportunity, and then how do we make this a concrete set of recommendations or guardrails for the business? So, we dug in, and we're still doing research on short form because we started off by understanding, like, is this a threat or an opportunity? We discovered it was actually an opportunity, and a huge one.
Mm. Of
Um, Free marketing for the most part, UGC,
course,
anytime.
right?
It is.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. Anytime
Hmm.
a fan posts something about, like, think about a recent show like Heated
Mm.
Rivalry. That show, a lot of its success was fostered by platforms like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube,
Hmm.
and fans start to perpetuate the fandom and grow the fandom through their own posts and their own takes on the characters. And so it's fascinating. I don't want to say they do the job of marketing, because we still build trailers, there's still a broader
Right.
marketing strategy, but this becomes a whole universe for us to harness. So that was the first step, and then it's like, okay, um, we know it's important, but how do we think about short form within a broader, more traditional media mix? So where does short form fit in? If you're, doing, pieces in the trades, or you've got an official trailer that's going to be on TV, where does short form fit
Mm.
in the consumer journey when consumers are being exposed to different touch points? How do they interact? What role does short form play? Is it the final trigger to view, or is it
Hmm.
something that generates excitement, generates anticipation, etc.? And then what are the formats that are working for us? What format should we be leveraging? How do we work with UGC? So I only go into detail on short form to explain that the way that we tackle these subjects is we identify kind of broadly what's going on in the ecosystem,
Mhm.
and then we dig in, and then we start to get very narrow and specific so we can continue to work with our business unit partners to identify what are the concrete opportunities for us and how do we implement those opportunities.
Mhm. It's
Um,
funny you mentioned fandom. I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to talk about the creator economy, and there's always that tension between is this marketing or is this core content? What do we
yeah,
do with this content? I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago on this podcast where we were talking about, hey, do you? I mean, we there's examples, right, where shows start on social and then they get picked up and they turn into these big things on traditional media, including streaming now. And the question is, can you still build audience the way you used to with traditional, media, or do you need to, bring that audience with you when you launch a new title, right? I'm sure you're always thinking about that.
yeah, we're actually still in the vein of short form. I'm working with one of the teams in the business to look at whether they should launch a brand through um, a more traditional release or through leveraging short form platforms.
Hmm.
And I think it depends, but what we found, even with our library content, so old shows like The Wire, Gilmore Girls, Vampire Diaries, we're not marketing any of those shows, but people are watching them. We're like, wow, how are people finding them? It's not just browsing on HBO Max, and it's short form.
Hmm.
Their yet new viewers are being exposed through short form and other fans, like basically UGC, that's getting them excited. They're sort of getting introduced to franchises and titles that they've never heard of before. And fans are creating the new fans for shows that are, in some instances, 20 years old. So endlessly fascinating.
I can't
Um,
tell you the number of times my kids have been like, Dad, you got to check out this new show. And I'm like, I was watching that in my 20s. It's like,
New to them. And that was kind of another interesting phenomena for us with the generations research. It created all these other tributaries that we dug into because yeah, we wanted to know like what's going on with this. It was called nostalgia viewing, but it's
yep.
not nostalgic because they weren't alive when it came out. So we're like, well, what's the impetus to view? And we realized, oh my God, like Gossip Girl is all over TikTok. And so that is the platforms are not taking away viewers in this sense. They're actually seeding viewers who are then going on to HBO Max and watching the series from start to finish. So that's been really fascinating. We have also been doing a lot of work on the impact of political ideology on content choice. So
Oh,
do
interesting.
conservatives and
Yeah,
liberals
that's very
watch?
topical. Yep.
Yeah, that's been fascinating.
Maybe you can figure out why there's this divide where people have completely different paradigms, right? It's like, and
Mhm.
that affects their entertainment choices.
Yep. Yep, it does 100%. More so for conservatives than liberals, actually. Liberals are much more omnivorous. They kind of watch anything, but
Hmm.
they content plays a much more central role in their lives, whereas conservatives content just happens to be a little more peripheral.
Hmm.
Their focus is community, family, church,
Hmm.
their jobs. Like it's much more of a
Oh, I'd love
traditional.
to see. Have you published it? Is any of this public?
We launched it at a conference in January, but yes, we're just going broader and more public with it. And I do need to figure out, apart from taking it around to conferences, maybe there's a white paper in there. So thank you for reminding me. I've got to put
Yeah,
that
no,
on
I,
my
I
list.
I love that kind of stuff because it gets to the kind of the underbelly of, consumer behavior and how it impacts, consumer choice, content discovery, recommendation, all those kind
Hmm.
of fun things, which we seem to be hopefully perfecting or improving with the help of AI technologies. I
Yep.
do want to shift gears a little bit, and
Yep.
through AI, it's hard to get through any conversation without
I
AI.
know.
What do you see as the biggest trends in the industry right now? And where do you see those going?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So AI is actually, so the other thing my team is focused on is new tech.
Gotcha.
So we're always, of which obviously AI is the predominant one. So we look at the present, but we also look at the future and what should we be paying attention to as a business. So we've been taking kind of a two-pronged approach to AI. Excuse me. We've been taking a two-pronged approach to AI, which is um, every study that we do, we challenge ourselves to use AI in a different way, just to road test different approaches, different methodologies, different use cases for AI. So we've been using AI to generate stimulus, to do the more conventional open-end stuff, to
Mhm.
moderate, just to kind of help the business understand what's the playbook from a research perspective, what are the strengths and limitations of AI as a research tool. But the other thing we've been doing, which is very interesting and tricky, is, the world of content. How far can we push AI? AI is actually in many ways a brilliant thing for production because
Mhm.
whereas maybe in the past you had to fly a whole crew to Qatar and then, Russia and then, um, you know, New Orleans,
Mhm.
like I'm thinking about a Bond movie or something where you have multiple global locations. Now, suddenly with AI, you can simulate location, which
Yeah.
is an immense cost savings.
Mhm.
So, what we've been testing with some of our partners who work on the production side is what are the limits? Like, where are consumers going to push back, and what is acceptable in terms of AI generated content? Like, what
Mhm.
if the entire cast is AI versus what if a particular stunt is AI versus a background or a
Mhm.
setting? That's in the field right now. So we have
And how is
created,
that different from the same, people talk about CGI we've had for a while. It's like,
I
oh, that was a
know.
CGI scene, that wasn't a real stunt. Is it the same kind of trade-off, or is there something uniquely different about AI that raises the stakes somehow?
Well, I mean, it's so fascinating because, yeah, a lot of the stuff is already like post-production.
Yeah.
There's like a dog that runs through the background and the dog gets wiped out in post-production because
Mhm.
the dog wasn't supposed to be in that scene. Or actually, speaking of dogs, the dog in Crypto in Superman is a CGI dog. He's not a real dog. So I agree. I feel like AI has been sort of demonized and I
Yeah.
think and kind of anthropomorphized because I almost feel like people forget like AI is machine learning, but with a layer of intelligence. It's not like actual creatures who are impersonating humans. Like it's funny, it gets taken to this level where you almost think that they're these robots that are running around doing our jobs. It's still
Yeah.
data driven. And a lot of this stuff is not, you're totally correct. It's not net new. So I think part of it is just some of the rap that AI has.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is some reaction going on, and people, it's almost become sort of a cottage industry of pointing out like, oh, that's AI, that's fake or whatever. I'm like, look, you're watching a superhero movie. Like, did you think it was all real, right? People are flying around, in metal suits and stuff. So, yeah, I think some of that will become, more in the background. People care
Mhm.
less, and it'll be more kind of seamless. I think that's like people don't like being fooled or tricked. There's
That
something,
you've
right?
totally, Brian, you've hit the nail on the head. That is the number one. I think when it was CGI, I think everybody's just become accustomed to
Yeah.
effects. And in fact, I think when the effects aren't there, like you go back and you watch some of the movies from the 70s, like sci-fi movies from the 70s, and they just look corny. I mean, they're still great, but you can tell that this
It's
is
so kitschy. It's
pre-digital.
almost cool.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh wow, they made that out of paper mache. Um, so, it's made a much more immersive, more sophisticated, viewing experience for
Mm.
consumers. But it's that disclosure. We've done research and from last year when we did our Tech ANU, and actually, one of our industry colleagues from Hub Research also corroborated this same data point, which was if you don't tell people, they feel duped. So it's the
Mm.
disclosure that at present is really important. But it's also when you've moved away from the human touch, like in other words, when it feels like there's no humanity or no sort
Mm.
of human complexity being brought to the table, that's when people push back. And there is
Mm.
still, like when you see the characters, there's sort of still a bit of a mechanical quality because human beings, data's logical, data follows a numerical trail. Human
Yeah.
beings are totally unpredictable. We do one thing, then we do another thing. Like we don't follow predictable trails. And that's what makes humans fascinating. So I
Right.
think that's always going to be where that distinction is between AI and humans. In terms of trends, I mean, I guess maybe people, as you say, will just become more complacent over time. I think we just need to make our peace with the role of AI in our lives
Mhm.
and think about, like, as humans, we have to master the technology, which means we have to understand where is it going to make our lives easier and free up our time to do more interesting stuff.
That's the key thing. And again, that came up on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, which is, hey, you know what? Let's eliminate the drudgery of our jobs, right?
Yeah.
That gives us more power. We don't want to give up creative control, right? We still want to tell, stories that are, touch hearts and excite people and inspire people, whatever. And these AI tools can help us with that,
Hmm.
right? And this whole idea of AI slop, if you're just kind of letting AI do your homework for you, then that's on you, right? You've given up that control.
Yeah. I mean, I keep thinking about, oh my God, the Hell movie, Space Odyssey. Why am I forgetting the
Al,
name?
yeah, yeah, Space Odyssey. I
Hell.
wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that if I were
Yeah.
you.
And
Yeah.
it's like, this isn't hell. Like, hell just became the scary computer that, it's not like the worst case scenario for AI where suddenly the computer becomes the control center and the humans are helpless. I mean, last time I checked, we still had control. I don't know. And I guess
We'll check it in 10 years and
yeah,
see if
let's
that's
check in.
still
And we
the
either,
case.
well, and you see it or you don't. But, maybe it's a naive view, but I still think at present there's so much it can do to make our, like, even if you think about fields apart from ours, medical diagnoses,
Hmm.
being able to pinpoint things that the human
Yeah.
eye couldn't pinpoint, putting together complex symptoms and coming up with maybe different medications that hadn't been
Hmm.
thought of. Like, there's so many beneficial things that I guess, it's like anything else in life. The more you focus on the dark side, you shut
Hmm.
your mind off to the opportunities. The
Yeah.
more you focus on the potential, you don't want to be naive and not aware of the dark side, but you also don't want to shut yourself off to all the good things that something can perpetuate or
Yeah, I agree.
deliver.
100%. And I think, humans, if we're anything, we're the masters of creative destruction. We've
Yeah.
destroyed entire industries and replaced them with new industries and higher paying jobs and more ways to kind of master our environment type of thing. I don't want to diminish the fact that, there is job loss along the way and there are impacts to people in entire industries. But I'm an optimist, I guess.
Weirdly, I'm not, although sometimes I feel like, I guess I am. I'm a mixed bag, but
Mhm.
I
You're
just
a
feel,
realist, right? Because you're doing the research, right? Let the data
well,
tell you what's
yeah,
happening.
do you know what? That's a better way to characterize it.
Yeah.
And I think the minute you focus on the negative, you might as you're just like, you know, packing your
Just
bags
pack
and
it
going
in, right? You're
home.
done. Go.
You're done.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. You can't do that. Well, listen, we're just about out of time, Natasha. One of the things we like to do in this podcast is sort of personalize some of the leaders in the industry. Is there a hobby or an interest, something you do outside of work that you can share with our audience?
It's so funny when you get asked that question because when you start to think about the stuff that you do outside of work, it always comes across as being so ultra boring. But here you go. Here we go. I'm a pretty sporty person. I'm a runner. I like to ski. Very individual sports, but kind of the time, it's your time to think. When you're out on the
Mhm.
run, when you're out for a run, the brain kind of goes freely and you come up with a lot of ideas maybe that you wouldn't when you're being distracted by other things. Of course, I love movies because I work for a movie company, but I have very specific movie tastes. My family belongs to great theater in New York called the Film Forum, and I'm really obsessed about I love old films, anything from the 40s, 50s,
Oh, me
60s.
too. Yeah.
You're also one of these
Yeah,
types.
yeah, yeah. Kind of an old
70s,
soul that, black and white. Like my kids would
yes.
be like, "What is this, Dad?" I'm like, "Yeah." That's so cool.
Converting the children to the black and whites. My daughter, when she was tiny, said, "Was the world black and white back then?" Which I thought that was such a great literal sort of view of black and white movies, but they're amazing. I mean, I never get bored of those. And I like cooking and traveling and nature. There's all sorts of, I guess, it always feels quite conventional, but anyway, the old movie thing is maybe a little conventional. It's always nice to find a kindred spirit, somebody who loves the.
Yeah, it's funny. My daughter is an old soul too. She I don't know how, but she latched on early onto like Little House on the Prairie.
Oh
I
my God,
Love
I
Lucy.
love that.
Huge I Love Lucy fan. Like we actually named our dog Lucy, partly inspired by Lucille Ball. And it's really sweet, it's funny because, a lot of the ways people interacted with each other it seems kind of antiquated but charming for her. So yeah, it's funny.
Oh, I love that she was a Little House on the Prairie gal. So was I. I went so far as to make my father buy me a bonnet, one of the sun bonnets, which I wore to school, and somehow survived unscathed. I was that strange. So, hurrah to her. That was such a love. And the books
Did you
are,
have a fa
you know,
favorite character for Little House on the Prairie?
I mean, I think everybody, I kind of like Nellie because she was just so
Fun to
bad.
hate, right? Yeah, she's a perfect villain, but sweet at the same time, and it ended well too. I love that
Yeah.
narrative
And of
arc at the
course,
end.
I had a massive crush on Willie, her brother, but there
Not
was
Manly, Almanzo.
Oh, and Justin Bateman was, I forgot, he played like the little brother. That
You're
show was so,
right. Was that his break? Was that his breakout
that was must have
role?
been his first role.
Must have been, yeah.
Jason Bateman. Why do I always call him Justin? Jason Bateman.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he was that, I think must have been, he was little. Like he
yeah,
must have been like certainly under 10.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's still on, I guess. Anyway, kudos to your daughter, fellow fan.
Yeah, it's and here's the thing. I mean, here's the beautiful thing about our industry is like we're always kind of we got new titles and new exciting franchise and stuff, but you got this massive library of tons of shows, right? That can meet the needs of every genre, every demographic or whatever. And you get surprised, suddenly my daughter who's 20 loves these old shows from the 60s and 70s.
She's definitely yeah, she and I are part of the same old soul club without question. You're either there or you're not, and I respect the people who aren't. But it's nice to see that there's somebody in the 20s who is following on that path.
Yeah, she definitely is. Well, listen, Natasha, I really enjoyed our conversation here
Me
today.
too.
Thank you for sharing your career journey and some of the trends I think are very interesting. Obviously, AI, that's going to be a dominant theme again this year, and we'll see how that evolves and everything. And yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for inviting me on. It's always fun to chat, research, and Little House on the Prairie and all the other varied topics in between.
That's awesome. Well, listen, Natasha, thank you so much. Once again, this is
Thanks,
Brian
Brian.
Mahoney from OTT Executive Podcast signing off. Everybody, have a great day.
Thanks again, Brian.